Welcome to the ManageEngine Podcast, where we speak to expert minds shaping the future of technology and business. I'm your host, Jeremy Spence, an enterprise analyst here at ManageEngine. And today we're going to get real about AI. Artificial intelligence has evolved from experimental to existential in enterprise strategy, but there's a massive gap between ambition and execution. Pilots abound, scaled impact, not so much. That's why I'm thrilled about today's conversation. Our guest has worked at the intersection of business strategy and emerging technologies for decades. He's someone who's helped enterprises not just experiment with AI, but navigate the messy middle and reach outcomes that matter. Michael Barnes helps decision makers across Asia Pacific rethink their business and technology strategies to become more sustainable and compete more effectively in the digital age. He's globally recognized speaker and author with over 25 years of research and consulting experience. Prior to joining Tech Research Asia, Michael was a vice president and research director at Forrester Research for over 15 years, leading Forrester's Asia Pacific digital business strategy and customer experience services, as well as sustainability research in the region. He's also held a leadership role at Gartner, advising enterprises on software integration and transformation strategies. His core expertise spans digital transformation, CXO strategy, sustainability, customer and employee experience. Michael, we're so thrilled to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Jeremy.
Michael, let's start with a foundational question. AI has now been in the enterprise toolkit for many years, in its budgets, in its strategies, in its roadmaps. But if we're honest, like a lot of organizations are still stuck in pilot mode. What's the hard truth about why this is happening?
Yeah, look, Jeremy, I mean, it's a good question. I would question, or at least push back maybe on the how many years is many. Realistically, for most organizations, we're talking, 2 to 3 years of investing, or investing in anger, let's say, of actual looking for opportunities to drive production systems and have them be impacted by AI. Certainly for technology providers, it's been much longer. For research organizations, but for actual commercial organizations, it's still pretty new, relatively speaking. And so as such, I think there's a lot of struggling within organizations still to get to the way I would say it, the so what. I've been an analyst, I think, as you mentioned, for a very long time. And the challenge with any new technology, and we see it again and again and again, and AI is no different, is mistaking the means to an end for the end. To say it a different way, maybe be a bit trite. AI is the vehicle; it's not the destination. And we being the royal we, all of us, we forget that because it's hyped, because it's exciting. We think there's some inherent value in it. And there isn't. It can result in some value, but too many organizations have missed the opportunity to actually think in terms of outcomes and work back to the technology.
Thank you, Michael. That really sets the tone. Now, let's talk about something which we see happening all the time in organizations, following advice that sounds smart, but often leads them astray. What is one bad piece of advice that you see too many enterprises following blindly when trying to scale AI, just because it sounds strategic or because everyone else is doing it?
Right. That's such a good question. Bad piece of advice, act now. And it's not that they don't need to act now, because they do, but act towards what end? And, the theme throughout this entire discussion will likely be outcomes. It has to be focused on business outcomes. And what happened 2 years ago, 1 year ago, maybe 3 years ago, the hype around AI was such that business and tech leaders, organizations felt compelled to move quickly. Towards what end? They weren't always sure. And that's what's led to problems, because you could get a fabulous proof of concept in place. If it's not linked to clear business outcomes that are measurable and actually achievable, it never actually makes it into production. And that's what's happened with what estimates say probably 90% of AI-related proof of concepts never get past the POC stage. It's because they're not linked to the underlying motivation for acting now, if that makes sense.
That's such a valuable perspective. Now, I want to tap into your experience, particularly working across APAC. It's obviously a region that's innovating fast, but also really different from Silicon Valley. Are there any region-specific dynamics or models which you've seen across APAC that contradict Western narratives about AI scale and success?
Yeah, I don't know if it's about narratives, but there are some clear differences. So one of the things at Tech Research Asia, we're data-driven. So we engage with thousands of tech and business decision makers every year. This is true in Australia, but also across the region. And so if we look at the data from our most recent survey and look at the expectations around AI, they're actually, they're quite different. Across the region, the number one business priority is growth. And that's followed by cost management and innovation. What's different is in Asia, the order's a bit reversed. There's more of a focus. Growth is still number one, but innovation is a very close second. Whereas cost management is less of a concern as it is in Australia. What does that mean for AI? Well, the expectation for value around AI is different. In Australia, it's very much cost first, then productivity improvement second. That's the expectation for tech and business decision makers as of now. In Asia, the number one value expectation from AI investments is improved process efficiency, process improvement, which is far more directly linked to innovation. So one could, I think, reasonably argue that decision makers in large parts of Asia are maybe a bit better aligned between their business objectives and the focus or the expectation around AI investments.
Awesome. So I'd now like to dive a little bit into some of the friction points with AI, where companies try and move beyond pilots, they're hitting walls and often in unexpected places. So where is it that you see organizations typically are getting stuck? Is it data, leadership, talent, something else?
Yes, all of the above. And that's true. But if you look at maybe the biggest issue, and this came out as well in the data across the region, if you ask organizations what they need, want, expect from their strategic partners, so their service providers, their technology vendors, number one is help, guidance on use cases, on implementation towards a business objective. It's not about the technology implementation. It's give me examples of where this technology has worked in the past or where it could potentially work. And I think that's the biggest pain point. The technology issues, the skills or lack of skills, certainly the data issues are all relevant, but if you don't have clarity on what you're trying to achieve, then none of those really matter. And I think that's what we've seen consistently across the board. Now, in terms of adoption, it's really interesting because it's a bit of a dichotomy, right? You have organizations who, because of this act now approach, this urgency to move quickly, build up some type of AI capability internally, right? And they're looking to drive some type of transformative initiative or agenda through their use of AI, which tends to be poorly scoped, tends to be maybe wildly optimistic in terms of objectives relative to capabilities. Then you have the other side of the spectrum, which is organizations adopting AI that's embedded, as we'd say, embedded within their technology, whether it's ManageEngine, Microsoft, anyone else. The tech vendors are embedding AI within the solutions. So organizations are leveraging it just as a capability that they're getting essentially out of box, right, with the next upgrade. So there's more AI happening within organizations. It's just we tend to focus on the AI projects per se, as opposed to the AI-enabled capabilities that are happening pretty much everywhere.
Okay, so we've talked about what doesn't work, but if we flip that on its head a bit, there's many organizations who are scaling AI in ways that are meaningful and successful, but also responsible. You've worked with a lot of such enterprise clients across different stages of AI maturity. What is one common early decision or mindset shift you've seen amongst the ones who've really made success?
Yeah, again, I sound like a broken record, but that's okay because it's an important point. It comes back to, I think, understanding objectives, right, the outcome, and then structuring, I suppose, the scope of the AI projects accordingly. So I'm an analyst. This is the world I live in. So analysts like frameworks, right, and taxonomies. So if you think about it, you can boil it down. Roughly speaking, there's about 3 different types of AI projects. Again, this is overly simplified, but bear with me. So the first one is really augmenting what's currently happening. The second one would be extending into new, different areas. And the third is transformation, doing something that we haven't thought of currently as an organization, right? So if we think about augmenting, and that's where we're seeing the primary value now. This is where the production systems are. I'll give you an example. So think about healthcare, for instance. The majority, so over 50% of any nurse's time is spent doing admin. Now, if we can leverage AI to improve productivity, reduce admin, that means more of their time is spent servicing their patients, right? Engaging with patients. That does 2 things. It greatly improves the value of the service the patient is getting, but it also improves engagement of the nurse because they likely didn't get into nursing to do admin, right? They got in to work with patients, and this frees them to do that. That's hugely valuable, and it's measurable, right? In terms of not only the patient, or in this case, patient experience, but also employee retention and engagement, right? And that's key. In terms of extending, if we think about healthcare, okay, now we have access to more information, right? So now we can proactively, and we're seeing organizations do this, proactively link patients or potential patients to clinical studies that are happening globally. This is information that individual institutions wouldn't be able to have just because of the sheer volume of data required to analyze, to actually identify all the studies and link them to potential beneficiaries in terms of patients. And then we think about transformation, and wearables aren't new, but the ability to proactively monitor and make recommendations on our individual health based on the data that we're sending potentially years ahead of any obvious signs of an issue, that's game changing. That's transformative. So that's an example in healthcare. But if you look at retail or transport logistics, really any industry, and you put it into that context, suddenly it kind of demystifies AI, right? And you can speak to non-technical business leaders in terms of that. Okay, let's start with augmentation. Where can we improve customer experience, or improve employee engagement, or improve productivity that leads to something valuable for the organization? They get it. And then you can start directing funds towards that and get what we currently need in the climate we're in, which is near-term kind of incremental value delivery, as opposed to AI is going to transform the organization. Let's do that, which doesn't mean anything tangible to anyone. It's kind of an aspirational view that can't be measured. So hopefully that makes sense. But that kind of framework approach is the kind of current best practice, even at the risk of oversimplifying, because it allows you to build up a kind of basic capability and identify the other areas we mentioned, lack of skills or data quality issues or governance and policy issues within a context that's manageable.
Thanks for your insights there, Michael. I'd also like to ask about, in your experience, we speak about the technical readiness almost coming in as the next update, but technical readiness and leadership alignment are often really interdependent when it comes to getting these projects successfully over the line. So what are some of your general observations in this area?
Yeah, Jeremy, look, I mean, it's challenging, right? Because there's multiple pressures on organizations. So if you look at certainly our data from a regional standpoint, in terms of tech priorities, the top 3 in order, number 1 is modernization. So that's modernizing infrastructure and applications. And a lot of that is about compliance. It's about resiliency, right? And to your point, it's about getting the most recent updates that are available from our providers. Number 2, no surprise, is cybersecurity and ensuring resilience for the organization through cyber. And then number 3 is enabling innovation. Now, that holds true across really all key markets, certainly that we study across Asia, and for all key roles within organizations, with one massive exception. The CEO or the managing director, basically the head of the organization, their view of the tech priorities is different. They actually prioritize enabling innovation as number one, ahead of both modernization and cyber. Now, it's not that they devalue either of those. It's just that I think, given their position, they understand those are, that's the cost of entry, right? That's just table stakes. If you can't do that, if you can't ensure the resilience of your systems, if you can't protect your customers' data, then you'll cease to exist or function as a viable entity. So that's just the table stakes. But enabling innovation is what allows sustainable differentiation, right? The ability to continually deliver improved service to your customers, whoever they may be, and however you define brand success. And so when it comes to the challenge for AI, I would argue, not 100%, but 99% about leadership and vision. I think if you have that in place, the technology will follow. The challenge is when technology is kind of the cart leading the horse, what you end up with is a situation where you're focused too much on operational, I don't say excellence, but operational processes and managing infrastructure and business resiliency, but not necessarily around driving actual innovation. So less control and more enablement is the balance to try and find as a tech professional.
And Michael, I'd like to finish up with chatting about the human side when it comes to AI. We're seeing profitable companies laying off workers, and whilst many factors are at play, AI seems to be shifting what leaders are thinking they can automate. So do you think that AI is perhaps creating a bit of an illusion of a safety net that's giving leaders confidence to cut jobs?
Yeah, Jeremy, look, I think I'm not sure I agree with the basic starting point, the idea that profitable companies are laying off employees kind of in large numbers, kind of across the board, certainly in parts of Asia. I think realistically, so if we take a step back, again, I'll come back to the data, the number one business challenge, and this was true across all the markets we looked at, across all the roles for organizations, is attracting and retaining staff. That's number one. So they're still looking for staff, but they're looking for the right staff, right? And if we come back to that framework that I mentioned, so the starting point for most successful AI initiatives is around augmenting what folks are currently doing, basically making them more productive in their day-to-day. Now, that sounds great, but even that's just a means to an end, because productivity improvements need to lead to something. It could potentially be staff reductions, but we're not seeing that across the board. What we're seeing, at least initially at this point, is that productivity translating into improved customer experience and improved employee engagement. So it's freeing up, I referenced the nurse earlier, freeing nurses up to focus on patient care, which is why they got into the profession in the first place. And we're seeing that as well in customer service as well, really in any customer-facing role, but it extends within organizations as well, even in something like IT operations and support. So I think there's clear examples of layoffs and redundancies happening, particularly in the tech sector. But in a lot of other sectors, I think the biggest concern currently is uncertainty around the global macroeconomic environment, renewed fears of inflation, renewed fears or growing fears about the potential threat of tariffs and what that might mean on, say, supply chain visibility, supply chain disruptions, things like that. And we're still seeing some concerns around the increased frequency of natural disasters, and again, impacts on supply chains. So I think what we're seeing still, for the most part, there's exceptions, but for the most part, AI is currently being viewed as a way to augment what organizations are currently doing. So it's going to sound trite, but to do more with existing staff, not necessarily to do more with less. That was a bigger focus, I would say, 2 years ago. Right now, the focus is more on improving productivity. Where that goes, if that leads to cuts, that's a different question. I hope it doesn't. It certainly could for some, but I think that's the wrong approach. Realistically, organizations should be looking at ways to shift their key staff to more value add roles, value add activities. But that assumes that staff can do the the value add activities, right? If they're very comfortable doing repetitive, non-value add tasks that they've been doing 4, 5, 10, 20 years, then they're not going to be comfortable in the emerging world of AI augmented work.
Thank you, Michael. That was packed with great insights, nuances, and sharp takeaways, especially around unseen traps, cultural blind spots, and leadership moves that can really break how AI works at scale. We've covered a lot today, from why enterprises stall at the pilot phase and what makes scaling possible, to how AI is quietly reshaping not just operations, but how we think about work itself. If you're a tech leader navigating AI transformation, this is the kind of clarity and candor that's needed more than ever. To everyone listening, if this conversation helped clarify your thinking, challenge your assumptions, or helped spark a new idea, please consider subscribing to the ManageEngine Insights Podcast. We'll continue bringing you in-depth conversations with experts who are shaping the future of enterprise technology. Until then, stay curious, stay sharp, and keep building smart.